Are you manufacturing your product in China, India, Vietnam, somewhere else? And do you want to send someone to the factory to check the quality of your products to make sure that they meet your standards? If so, then you need a quality inspection checklist. So I'm joined here by the founder of Insight Quality, Andy Church. So thank you for joining me, Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Billy. I think this is a relevant topic for people who are manufacturing product abroad and want to ensure that what they receive matches the quality of what they ordered.
Absolutely. Let's start out by asking the most basic question, which is what is an inspection checklist? Now, essentially, this is a document that the inspector takes to the factory, and they're going to use this as kind of a guide to the inspection that has all the tests and all the checks that they're going to conduct on your product. So, Andy, why is it so important to have this checklist and to have a good one?
Well, Billy, as you mentioned, the checklist is a guide. It's a roadmap on how to conduct the inspection. And while Insight and other third-party quality assurance service providers have a lot of experience in conducting inspections and can do so, create an inspection checklist without the client or the buyer's input, it's really important to incorporate the buyer's feedback and knowledge because they're the ones that know their products the best. So simply put, an inspection checklist is a guide or a roadmap on how to conduct the inspection.
Yeah, and whether you're going to use a third party or not, even if you're going to go to the factory yourself or send someone from your team, you still need to have a thorough inspection checklist to really have an organized and structured and consistent way to check your products. So,
Yeah, let me add, Billy, you mentioned
yeah,
consistent, and I'll hit on that because it is important. Many of our clients, we supplement their own teams, or they may use another service provider in a country or a region where Insight doesn't currently have coverage. And by having a standardized inspection checklist, one, the format, but also the process to create, removes subjectivity and allows for consistency regardless of who conducts the inspection, whether it's internally conducted by the buyer or among different third-party service providers.
absolutely. Okay, so now that we kind of have an idea of what these checklists are and why they're so important, well, we want to talk about how you can develop your own inspection checklist. So essentially, there are two things that you need to do here. The first is that you need to come up with a list of defects of, things that might go wrong with your product. And the second is that you need to categorize those defects into sections on the inspection checklist. All right. And so when we're developing a defect list, we have kind of three tips for you. The first is that we want to think about the specifics of your product. So Andy, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Right. So the specifics about your product are could be color, it could be size, it could be a lot of different things. And looking around my desk, one of the things I can use as an example is a mobile phone holder. So the specifics here are, and not to go into everything, but just a couple highlights, is that it's got an auto release for the holder there. It's adjustable as far as height. It can be adjustable. So if any one of these specifics doesn't work, then the product isn't functioning as intended. And that's an example of a specific is look at all the different attributes of your product, from the size, from the functionality, the color. And so, that is the place to start, is looking at the basics. And also, what can go wrong. In this case, if we're not able to adjust the height, then that is something that can go wrong. If somebody, has a really large mobile phone, and for me, you can't see my setup, but if I want it just under my computer monitor and I can't lower the mobile phone holder, that doesn't function as intended, and it's going to lead to some dissatisfaction. Another way to develop a defect list is looking at reviews. If you're selling online, which almost all of our customers do in some regard, whether they're a brick and mortar retailer and they have their own site, or through an e-commerce platform like Amazon or eBay or somewhere else, there's reviews. And also RTV, which is return to vendor data. So complaints that come in when somebody's returning. Looking at the customer complaints in RTV, which is return to vendor data, can allow our client or the seller to understand issues with the product that maybe not have been apparent when initially creating the defect list or design or something like that. So, those three things, looking at the specifics, looking at what could go wrong, and looking at customer complaints or return data will allow for a comprehensive defect list and inspection points to be included into the checklist.
Once we've done that, then we need to take the next step, which is to organize the checklist into sections. So we've come up with these kind of 7 sections that we typically see on the majority of our inspection checklists. And so we're going to talk about each of those 7 sections and what they include. So let's start with the first one, which is packaging and labeling. So could you explain what goes into that?
Sure. So we typically start off with reviewing the packaging and labeling of a gift box. This could also include the master carton. So labeling on a master carton is very important as far as dimensions, the weight, because regardless of whether you're selling to a brick and mortar retailer or shipping your master cartons into an e-commerce platform, all these distribution centers are automated, and they use the carton dimensions and the weight to help move the goods, the master cartons through the warehouse. When you're shipping goods, customs looks at the weight of a unit. So if you have 20 kilos or 42 pounds on your master carton, and it varies by quite a bit of double-digit percentage, that's going to raise red flags both with customs, could lead to chargebacks from the retailer because they are not moving the goods through their distribution center as they plan based on the discrepancy in the labeling. The packaging could also be, more importantly, this applies more importantly to brick and mortar, but when 2 or more manufacturers are making the same product and they wind up side by side on the retail store shelf, the coloring of the boxes need to match. The consumer doesn't want to think, oh, one's newer or one's older. They could be made at the exact same time by 2 different manufacturers. So that's where the gift box packaging is. The look is an element. Labeling, is there hang tags? What's on the hang tags? We typically have approval, either samples in soft form or hard copies of wording to match. So packaging and labeling is really an important element, even though it isn't quality related. Next, we come up with visual inspection, and one standardization across service providers internally, whether you're doing it internally or using a third party, is a visual inspection is typically done at arm's length. So hold the item at arm's length, look at it, make sure that there's no cracks, there's not dust, dirty. Using our mobile phone divider again, the visual inspection could be, is there a crack down the middle? Is there a mode mark that shouldn't be there? Something like that, visual aesthetics. Then we go into function testing. Earlier I mentioned the mobile phone device and adjusting it. It could be electric heater or an oscillating fan. A function test typically would include an incline test to make sure it doesn't fall over, which could lead to safety hazards because if a heater falls over, it's supposed to switch off, does it? Or does it keep running and potentially could create a fire hazard? Function testing, it could be life testing, cycle testing. Depending on the item, a chair, you could raise and lower it. We could put a certain amount of weight on it for a couple of hours during a portion of duration of the inspection. So function testing is how the unit is used, verifying that it is be able to be used as intended. Then we go into physical requirements. This would be dimensions of the good, the size, the physical dimensions. It, that's the most common. Weight. Looking at apparel, a large is not a large within brands, let alone within regions. So, we have a large shirt that we're measuring would be the client specifications and not some generic large standard, because they're a standard for a large size shirt that doesn't exist. So physical requirements are very important, and make sure that they align with the client specifications, which can change even within the same client depending on attributes. Maybe a shirt, slim, or which I don't wear, or full cut or something, are gonna within the same size could have two different physical requirements. Special test, I mentioned the incline test. On a inspection, we typically conduct sampling inspection, and it's not feasible or realistic due to time restrictions to conduct function or special test on the entire lot that's being inspected. So special tests such as running one item continuously for 8 hours would be a special test. Those are specifically called out from function testing. And another one would be assemble. If we have a chair or a bookcase ready to assemble furniture, something like that would be considered a special test. Next, we come up with barcode. We separate this from packaging and labeling, although barcodes are typically part of the packaging, because we want to scan a UPC to make sure that it scans correctly. If selling into retail and an item doesn't scan, that can cause a lot of issues at the checkout point, or if it scans incorrectly. If we're scanning an item that is a 4-pack and it comes up as a one pack because they reused a barcode, that could lead to lost revenues and profitability. There's also barcodes on the master cartons, so we often will include the requirement to scan and verify the barcodes on the master cartons as well. And finally, we typically include a drop test, and this simulates one portion of it would be simulating a courier delivery, whether it's Amazon delivering straight to your doorstep, or FedEx courier services like DHL, UPS, and whatnot. So a drop test will simulate the dropping of a master carton, opening it up and making sure that there isn't any damage inside. Are the goods properly packaged? Do they need to have some redesign on packaging? And this is important regardless of the item. It could be important to, the mobile phone holder, or obviously ceramic coffee mug. The packaging and the drop test, regardless of the product, can yield information that may end up being beneficial to ensure that your goods arrive to the ultimate buyers in the condition that you expect, which is perfect, quality-wise, no breakage, and ready to use.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing the information about the different sections there, Andy. I think it's very insightful. And the good news is we do have a sample inspection checklist, which we'll get to in a minute, but it includes all these different sections and has some realistic examples of what kind of checks would be in each section. But first, we want to talk about 3 important things that you need to understand about inspection checklists. These are things that people can sometimes miss or misunderstand. The first one is that these inspection checklists, like our sample checklist, are based on the AQL standard. So Andy, maybe you could briefly explain what that means.
So AQL is a sampling methodology, which stands for Acceptable Quality Limit. And in layman's terms, simply put, that means what's the worst tolerable quality you're willing to accept. In general consumer goods, such as coffee mugs, ready to assemble furniture, apparel, there's going to be defects in a manufacturing lot. It's unlike automotive or aerospace components and products, which have to be 6 Sigma, 0 defects. It's important to recognize there's going to be some defects in a shipment. So what's the worst tolerable you're willing to accept? And a sampling methodology such as AQL is a proven methodology that can be used to extrapolate the findings of a sample to the entire lot.
Absolutely.
So it's
And
important to incorporate into the checklist what your AQLs are. There's 3 classifications going into the second point. In defect classifications, it's critical, major, and minor. And for the purposes of this session, we're not going to go too deep into the 3 because we've written and provided collateral that goes deeper. But a critical is a safety issue. It can cause injury or death. A major is the item is not usable or doesn't function as intended and affects its salability. Minor, it doesn't affect functionality or usability or salability, but it deviates from the standard. So an example would be on a major, and I'm going to stick with my mobile phone device, it doesn't go up and down. It doesn't function as intended. So if you can't adjust this, this would be a major because it doesn't function as intended. A minor defect would be where there's a scratch, and it could be varied. A minor defect, it's 1 inch or less. A major, maybe 2 inches or more. And it's also important to, as I mentioned earlier, to hold it at arm's length. So you remove somewhat the subjectivity from it. Everybody's looking at approximately the same distance. So those are the 3 defect classifications. And it's important to recognize and classify the different potential defects as you create your checklist. And finally, the checklist should be a collaborative process. The checklist should be a living document. As you build an inspection history on a product, as you receive complaints or compliments, potential return data, there may be data within that information that can be incorporated into the checklist. Or in some cases, the checklist needs to be revised to lessen how stringent a defect is, or maybe something is no longer considered a defect and it was causing an inspection to be held or to fail. So it's really important to understand that the inspection checklist is a living document that should be reviewed periodically and updated as necessary.
excellent. Now, to wrap things up, we just want to say that we have a sample checklist which you can download. The link is provided here on the screen. It's in the article on our website about inspection checklists. And you can take this sample checklist and use it as kind of inspiration for your own checklist. The example that we use is a wooden doghouse, and your product may not be a wooden doghouse, probably isn't. But regardless, a lot of the things in there, like packaging and labeling and carton drop tests and all these kind of things, a lot of it is going to be very similar across different product categories. So download that and use it to inspire your process of coming up with your own inspection checklist. So thank you, Andy, for helping me to explain all of this information about inspection checklists. And do you have any final words about inspection checklists?
So thank you, Billy. My final comment on checklists would be, one, that as Billy mentioned, the doghouse probably isn't your product, but 80% of the checklist would apply to any product. It's product agnostic as far as categories. So use it as inspiration in the thought process on how to create your own inspection checklist. It's the 20% where it's really product specific that is important to customize. And reach out if you have any questions. So Billy, thank you for putting together this sample inspection checklist webinar. If you have any questions about the process or what should be included, or you're ready to schedule an inspection, please reach out.
Thank you for watching and take care.